Hello, I'm Tim Oates. I'm Group Director of Assessment Research and Development here at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but I really welcome the opportunity to go through the kind of challenges that we face in knowing what we should do to best structure assessment and learning in the future. I'm going to run through what was going well in education systems prior to pandemic, because there's a real risk that those are lost in some of the things that are said about the impact of pandemic. I'm going to run through the accumulating evidence that we had on good practice. I'm going to look at the impact of pandemic, both globally and in specific nations. And I'm going to bring all that together in terms of a listing of the things that we are doing to respond to pandemic and take assessment and learning forward in the future, and the kind of things that we would recommend to schools and teachers to do, so that the future of assessment and learning is really based on the very best evidence about good practice. So I want to emphasise one thing in particular, Eric Hanushek's work, which shows that we can improve both equity and attainment. We don't have to trade the two things off. But to achieve that, an improvement in both attainment and equity for all of our young people, we have to adopt certain approaches. Some approaches won't deliver that, some will. And I'll briefly run through our research on those that will. Of course, schooling is always affected by external factors, the circumstances in which families and pupils live. And we look systematically at the impact of that background and those external factors on the attainment of young people in schools. And schooling is essential in my view. It actually attenuates and reduces the impact of these external factors and these background factors on attainment. We can do wonderful things for individual children. Schooling really matters. And I think that's a message which we have to reinforce, because some voices have been raised after pandemic that somehow schooling is less important now, that we can support kids in working at home through digital and other means, which reduces the importance of schooling. I do not subscribe to that view at all. I think schooling really matters. It's there that children learn counterintuitive things that they wouldn't learn in other circumstances or through their everyday experience. And in those institutions they're supported by professionals who understand the content, the pedagogic and other processes which best support each individual to acquire this counterintuitive, difficult content which they need to confront through schooling. There has been a bit of pandemic panic. In England, for example, people have said, well, no other country has high-stakes assessment at 16. In Pakistan, you'll know that statement is wrong. We did two key studies, one in 2015 and another last year, of high-performing systems around the world. Now, in terms of the future of high-stakes examinations at key stages like the transition from lower to upper secondary at the age of 16, what our study of high-performing systems say that 21 of those high-performing systems that we looked at, all of them had high-stakes assessment at the age of 16. 14 of those actually discharged that high-stakes assessment through formal exams. Exams and high-stakes assessment are a feature of education systems around the world, not exceptions. They're embedded in high-performing systems, and they're there for a reason. They not only provide dependable assessment and a clear specification of standards, they often structure learning programs. They have linked high-quality materials. They perform a wide range of functions. And so pandemic panic has created these statements which are just not true about education around the world. So I think there is a future for high-stakes assessment. We need to make sure that it's technically of high quality, of course. We need to make sure that it better supports those other functions. We need to make sure that the balance of assessment and the workload is okay. But that's not radical reform, that's constantly improving what we do. I've dealt with some other pandemic panic statements, like the end of schooling as we know it. Well, it might we might have learnt some things about how to use digital to support learning, but it certainly isn't the end of schooling as we know it, because that implies that schools aren't important. And I've already outlined how important they are. What we know is that unnecessary massive change rips capacity from systems. So when we effect reform or massive change, we need to be secure in the knowledge that we're responding to something real, that we're responding to the right things in the right way. Because change is always costly, both in terms of material resources and in terms of all the things we have to stop doing to deal with the change. We need to retain complexity in our thinking and policy, in other words. There are a couple of things about context I want to say. Declining literacy around the world, that's a global issue and a sustained one. In England, I'm not going to be Anglo-centric, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things in England. Prior to pandemic, we improved our attainment in mathematics. Our literacy scores were stable in PISA 2018. Some people said, that's terrible, we haven't improved. No, but in 2018 PISA, 13 nations declined in literacy and only 4 improved. It was good that we held steady. The things that we were doing prior to pandemic were working. And that's a general message. We shouldn't let pandemic panic contaminate the evidence that we had on good practice, which we were accumulating prior to pandemic. Literacy, of course, allows access to all subjects. Literacy is tightly linked to cognition, so we should worry that it's declining globally. It means there's something external going on, and therefore schooling has to respond to those external tendencies. I want to talk now, just for a couple of minutes, about individualised learning. You will have come across people who say individualised learning is the future, personalised learning is absolutely critical. And it is true that learning is the learning of each and every child. It's their learning. It's their response to the kind of curriculum content we want them to learn. It's their learning in response to the well-managed learning managed by teachers. But when one person talks about individualised and personalised learning, they might mean something very different to what somebody else is meaning by using exactly the same term. We need to get beneath this. And of the things that Cambridge is doing, this is a critical one. Sorting out what models of individualised and personalised learning are the correct ones. For example, the first model, and I'm going to mention 3, the first model is every child at their own pace. And that surfaced in kind of educational thinking during the 1980s. Every child at their own rate and pace. What research tells us is this is almost impossible to manage. If each and every child in primary is moving at their own pace, what we find is you lose the capacity for kids to participate in the critical aspects of social learning. They're focusing on different things. They've gone into different things in different depth. No longer can the teacher treat the group as a whole to bring those that are doing really well and understood something in depth back to discussions of those that are struggling with the same idea. No, it's unmanageable. Things going in different directions. It sounds plausible, but practically it's unmanageable. Also within that model is often a statement that children should follow their preferences in learning. That's a disaster for equity. I mean, in England, again, as an example, we only have 6,000 girls studying physics out of 36,000. That's because often girls do follow their own learning preferences very early. Science is not for me, they assume, because of what they're told about what girls should and shouldn't engage in. So if we only go with preferences, those preferences often become systematic disadvantages. The second model, triage and assigning to root, is often based on key assessments, which then say, well, you're that type of learner, therefore you get this type of stuff. That's often built into digital materials, by the way. Now the problem there is that kids are then never exposed to more demanding material. It becomes a cycle, a self-fulfilling prophecy of low expectations. That's really problematic. The final model is the model that we really support. Screening, supporting, engaging, motivating. Rather like in Finland, in primary, quite a lot of testing. Quite a lot of formal testing. To know where each and every child is, where those that are struggling are at risk of falling behind. So immediate action can be taken, supporting them to bring their learning up, to reintegrate them into the group, to allow the rich process of social learning to occur again. And there are excellent examples in Shanghai, for example, well described in the book Cleverlands by Lucy Creehand, which I commend to you. So there are real risks in the wrong models of personalisation and following preferences and so on. But the upside of what we've seen in pandemic is greater use of digital support for structured work outside contact time. That's been great. We know that there's a strong relationship between thinking outside contact time about maths and literature and so on, and academic attainment. So that's really effective use of digital support to learning. Encouraging thinking outside contacting time. What has been the impact of pandemic on equality? Well, there's been problems of depressed attainment in relationship to discipline content, problems of decline in learning approaches and learning habits, social and emotional engagement with institutions has declined in some pupils, even the highest attaining, and the direct emotional impact of stress and lack of social interaction, which occurred during lockdown and during pandemic. That all adds up to problems in personal and learning identity. What that says is that we need to attend to all of those now in reintegrating cohorts fully back into education and reintegrating those very young children who in early years have been adversely affected by pandemic. Pandemic has worsened inequalities. There's a strong residual effect from external factors. And we know these are highly individualized effects. I interviewed high-attaining kids who said, well, I was logged on during pandemic, but I was only interested really in the subjects I love. That's why equality and equity and attainment are being depressed. Those kind of factors, those kind of things that wouldn't happen in a school because teachers were ensuring the engagement and motivation and activities of each and every child. There's much to play for now. School effectiveness is still an issue. We look at within school and between school variation in systems. And where that exists, we've still got educational quality to attend to. But existing evidence-based policies in place prior to pandemic do appear to be working in raising the attainment of systems and individual schools. So school effects need to be ramped up. Screening and diagnostic assessment with focused action is essential. Remedies, this is critical and really useful, that the remedies to interrupted learning are aligned with overall research on good practice and sound policy. That means the things we need to really focus on to deal with the problems of interrupted learning are the very things which are at the heart of sound educational policy going forward. It's not we need to do something now and then something different. If we do the things that really address interrupted education well, they are the same foundational elements for the highest quality education in the future. We know from systems that primary and secondary transition still need considerable attention. When we receive children in secondary from primary, we need to do diagnostic, supportive, remedial and acceleration work with young people to make sure that any issues of poor quality in primary are addressed. Not simply assessing children and saying, well, they're that sort of learner, so they're on that sort of track. So the future, to finish. Immediate action as schooling resumes, one-to-one diagnosis and support regarding learning loss, concentrated programs to accelerate and consolidate, monitor learning, immediate action on misconceptions, variation in practice and presentation of ideas and content, so that each and every child gains access to content, rich questions and discourse embedded in teaching, a focus on threshold concepts, complex language, and thinking outside contact time, which digital materials can really help with. But really all a focus on reintegrating pupils into education. And these are the things that we're doing in Cambridge. We know that high quality exams are a feature of the majority of high-performing systems. So we continue to make sure that summative examinations at 16, 18 are of the highest possible quality. That we're not engaged in excessive assessment, but that the measurement properties are good and the information coming from them is accurate and useful. Secondly, we're doing a lot of work on formative and screening assessment, which we can integrate into learning to maximise attainment in the manner that I described earlier. And thirdly, professional development on the uses of information from assessment, both summative and formative. Really integrating both summative and formative assessment fully into learning programmes in the most effective way possible. And to take the future of education forward in the right way, we've developed 12 principles for future education, all underpinned by systematic research, and that research is fully listed on our website. I hope that quick overview of how we were improving education prior to pandemic, what we know about the impact of pandemic and how we should respond to it, and how we should build those insights into education going forward, have been helpful and operate as a foundation for the discussion at the conference. Thank you very much indeed.